Welcome, everybody. This is the Capital Subcommittee meeting of July 13th. And our first order of business for the subcommittee, I think we'll do introductions a little bit later when there are more people here, but our first order of business is approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
I'll move them.
Great. And Mariah, you second them. Okay, I'll do a roll call. Andy?
Yes.
And Mariah?
Yes.
And Helen says yes. Okay, so we have that all taken care of. We're supposed to start with Erin Galantine, and I don't see her yet. So, Matt, do you want to give her a call, maybe?
Yeah, I can give Erin a call.
Because she's usually on time. So I'm wondering if she. Yeah, let's wait for that. Thank you, Regina, for joining us. Oh, Alexandra's here. Great. Alexandra, do you know if Erin's joining us too?
Yeah, the other one.
Well, she just went away. Alexandra?
Yeah.
Ah, there she is. Okay. Hi, Erin. No, you're on.
Hello,
Okay.
how are you this afternoon?
Great, great. So what I was thinking we'd go around and introduce everybody because I'm not sure everybody knows everybody.
Sounds great.
And then go on from there. So I'll just call off your names the way I see you guys here. Andy?
Hi, I'm Andy Liu. I'm a member of the school committee. I'm also, along with Helen, on the Pierce School Building Committee. So we'll probably work together.
And a member of the Capital Subcommittee. Okay, Matt.
Hi, everybody. Matthew Gillis, Director of Operations for the School Department.
Great. And Mariah.
Hi, everybody. Mariah Nobrega. I am a member of the school committee, member of the subcommittee. I'm chair of the finance subcommittee, and I am a proud Pierce and high school parent.
Regina. Not beep too? Weren't you a beep kid?
She does beep services. She's not full.
No, weren't you?
You're a
I-
Beep alumni.
I am, well, I'm Beep Lawrence and Lawrence, not
Thank you.
Pierce. So yes,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we got all your
everything.
credentials.
That's all of it.
Regina.
I'm Regina Watts, and I am the interim principal of early education, covering BEEP and kindergarten.
Great. Erin.
Erin Galantine, I'm the Commissioner of Public Works in Brookline and formerly the Parks and Open Space Director.
Thank you. Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alexandra Vecchio. I am the new Director of Parks and Open Space for the town of Brookline. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome to Brookline.
Thank you.
David.
Good afternoon. I'm David Perlman. I'm Vice Chair of the School Committee and a Brookline alum of BEEP. I was briefly at Lincoln, the Venn Devotion School, and the high school.
Thank you. And Carol?
Hi, Carol Levin, Advisory and EDAB and member of the Pierce School Building Committee, and I'm on the Advisory Capital Subcommittee, which is why I'm joining today.
Okay, I think I got everybody, unless somebody sees somebody else. I think we'll start with our agenda is for Erin to begin with the Baker School Tennis Court project. If you could update us on
Yeah,
that.
that sounds great. And actually, I brushed off the presentation that I had given to the school capital subcommittee for the last few years about the 4 schools that are really in dire need of sort of full kind of curb to curb renovations. So, and I know that you had it seemed like a couple new folks. So I thought maybe it would be helpful for me to go through that, and maybe I stop at Baker and can talk about specifically what that
Sure, we can do
that
it
sort of
that way.
subset project is, which just so everybody knows is specifically around the tennis courts. So
Yes.
we have had funding in the CIP that was voted on years ago to renovate the Baker School frankly, it was to renovate tennis courts townwide, and we've done an assessment on the condition of all the courts and prioritized them. Baker was next in line, and it was put on hold through the kind of the ninth school. Well, the whole process to, identify a location, and Baker was on the table for a period of time. And so sort of we tabled that and are ready now to move forward with that, restoration of the courts and some other accessibility improvements. But I can kind of outline that for you when we get there. And
That would be perfect. I like that way of doing it. It gives it
All
more
right.
context.
That sounds great. And for those of you that this is a little redundant, my apologies, but it is great to kind of
You may
revisit
not
and
remember. It's
talk
okay.
about how we work together on some of these renovation projects.
Before
Can
we
you
get
all hear me okay?
Yeah. Can I ask, are any decisions imminent, or is this purely for our sort of information right now?
I would say the Baker School Courts decisions are imminent.
So there are some things that the school committee needs to decide soon?
Well, it really was decided. And so, this is like an existing asset that has fallen apart that the community uses, that we were sort of tasked with upgrading. If for whatever reason the school committee doesn't want to do that, we would need to know that. So that would be a change in direction than kind of where we were.
But Erin, aren't the tennis courts under the Parks and Rec department and
The
not
tennis
under?
courts are permitted by Parks and Rec. They're managed by, they're managed under the Department of Public Works, Parks and Open Space Division, but they are under the jurisdiction of the school committee because they
they're
are
on our
within
property.
your boundary. And, there are kind of a lot of these funny boundaries, Pierce
Right.
and Lawrence are under the jurisdiction of Park and Rec, but they serve as school grounds. And,
Right.
we try to make all of this as invisible and
Sure.
seamless and unimportant to the public as we can, and, kind of treat them all as equally, valued, important public spaces to the community.
Right. Okay. So you need to be a co-host to present, right?
It looks like I can share my screen.
You can? Okay, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I can
Go for it.
actually.
Go for it.
So, we'll just start from the beginning. Can you see this?
Yes.
You can. And all right, great. So, big picture in terms of parks and open space, and Alexandra has already jumped in and done a lot of work on this with her team and the landscape architects. Is when we look at capital planning, we do a conditions assessment. So understand what are the existing conditions of the assets. Specifically, we look at safety and accessibility. And right here where I have a note about a third-party assessment of play equipment, we bring in a third party that every 2 years does an independent evaluation of all of the play equipment. And that is to make sure that we're conforming with all safety requirements that are out there. And we are constantly replacing panels, bolts, we're painting, we're putting in new slides, new handholds, all of that to make sure that our play equipment is safe and in very good condition. But we do this third-party assessment, and there does come to a point where we reach the end of sort of the successful and effective life of the play equipment. And generally the manufacturers will tell you 15 years due to our maintenance program and frankly funding that we have to have this very aggressive program on play equipment. We are able to get 20 sort of plus years out of the play equipment, but that is definitely sort of pushing it to the max. And there is a point where, and we've had this situation where there are no longer those parts, there are no longer those panels. So at that point, you're kind of just removing elements to make sure that your playground is safe. So sometimes spring toys or other pieces will have to come out. We've been in the situation before this with Waldstein Playground is they no longer made these particular bridges. They didn't make these panels. And so that whole structure ultimately had to be, disassembled because we couldn't replace components that needed to be replaced. And we, renovated that in time, and it was a successful project. So we do this life cycle analysis, and this helps us prioritize the projects that we need to work on with the community. And then we develop cost estimates. These preliminary cost estimates are for our purposes in terms of looking at the CIP, talking with the Park and Recreation Commission, with the advisory committee, with the school committee, so we understand what the probable cost is and what's included in that scope for the renovation. And we put together a full project description that explains what that is. So in terms of capital project priorities as it relates to the school grounds specifically, the 4 school grounds that you have that are really in dire need of kind of a curb to curb renovation is the Lincoln School, Heath School, Baker School. Well, Lincoln School and Heath School really are your top priorities. And Lincoln School, you're looking at equipment that was installed in 1992. It is time for renovation, and we are doing an increasing amount of work on those structures. They are safe and they are compliant, so you don't have sort of an imminent problem, but we really need to be planning for the renovation. With Heath, you see a few numbers here, and this is sort of sometimes what happens. So your youngest kid's play structure is a circa 1995. The 5 to 12-year-old structure is from 2005. And then the field was renovated when the school was upgraded. And then some of those paths, the accessible paths that come from Reservoir Road down through the site to Elliott, were part of the renovation in 2015. Baker School we're going to talk about, but that work was completed as part of that last school renovation. So that was around 1999. I think that's, I know it's on Helen's horizon for future discussion. And then the Lawrence School Longwood Playground, which we did renovate in 2004. And it's hard for me to believe, a project that I, worked on with the school committee and with the Park and Recreation Commission, but we do need to be thinking about this as, needing a renovation in the future. And of course, all of these are serving thousands of kids a day. It's the school, it's after school, it's sports, it's the neighborhood. The amount of use on these school grounds is tremendous, and it's fabulous. A couple projects that are not on our list right now, but I think that as a capital subcommittee, you should be thinking about, and we at the Department of Public Works are glad to think about it with you, is the old Lincoln School. That site, there is site work that should happen in terms of the stairs, the sort of asphalt, the green space, but I think that really needs to be part of an overall conversation about that building and the future of the building, but we're here to support you when the time is right. And then the Baldwin School as well is that play space is due for renovation. But again, I think that potentially it would be part of a long-term vision for that site. I had Baldwin School here because at one point it was, like I said, I came back to this because we've been talking about this since 2018, but I don't know that there are current plans right now for Baldwin, but there was at the time.
We're actually going to be discussing it a little
Oh, good.
bit.
Okay. So I think the grounds and the play equipment there should be part of your conversation.
Absolutely.
And then, Driscoll, we were glad to support the design review process there, and think you're going to have a great site to support the school and the neighborhood. And then Ridley, Runkle, and Pierce, are all were all relatively recently renovated. Although we'd like to see the 2 to 5-year-old structure that's behind the kindergarten area replaced as part of your renovation.
Which one?
The play space that is above the
Pierce?
parking deck for Pierce.
Yeah.
Oh, the one up on top.
The
Okay.
one up on
But
top,
that
which
would
I
be
think,
part of the same project, the Pierce
yes,
project.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah, sure. No,
Exactly.
definitely.
Just an aerial, we don't need to spend too much time, but we have looked at sort of the curb to curb, your wall conditions, fence conditions, stairs, treads, the pathways, the play structures, seat walls, fields, irrigation, etc. So we have looked at these not only through the aerial, but boots on the ground. Landscape architects have looked at all of this, developed unit sort of price estimates based on, linear feet of fence. It could be cubic feet of 5R for safety surfacing, et cetera, and developed cost estimates for each of these sites. So I'll just do this high level so that we can move on. But for
Sure.
the Lincolns and how we do this is we put together a construction cost estimate. We break it down into big categories with on our end a lot of sort of itemization that sort of rolls up and supports that. But we look at mobilization, site prep, demolition, all our perimeter conditions, fencing, railings, site furniture, paving and surfacing, utilities, stormwater management is incredibly important that we make sure that we are addressing all of the drainage and stormwater management needs and requirements at the time of construction. Play equipment, and the rubberized surfacing is critical for the schools. This is the poured in place surfacing. And this ensures that you have a uniform, stable, and accessible surface for the kids. We have been doing more and more working with the schools, trying to improve accessibility. So with any of your school renovations, you should be looking at this poured in place surfacing.
Right.
Which we have done at the schools, but I'm just emphasizing it's really important for inclusive play.
Quick question on this one. Does this include the historic wall and repointing or whatever might need to be done on that?
This includes a portion of the wall that was not done last time around.
Okay.
So there
Great.
is a small section that was not completed but most of Kennard was done and it turned the corner on Walnut, but there is a portion that was not done and that is included in this.
Okay, great.
And then we look at, what is your turf sort of open play area, and then pruning and planting. So with Lincoln and Heath, those are both for different reasons at $3 million. And I'll just give you the overview of Heath. I don't know how well you all probably know these schools really well, but Heath is a large site with Reservoir Road down on this side, if you can see my cursor. And this is the younger kids' play space. It's actually undersized for the amount of kids that go out and use it, but they also take advantage of this hillside, which is great. And then the 5 to 12-year-old structure, and we say it's 5 to 12-year-old, it's designed for that age group, is down below in this space here. And then there's also a basketball court and open playing field. So as I mentioned, Lincoln and Heath are the two that are in the most dire need of renovation. So the next two are sort of set up the same way. There's Baker. So again, we had, in terms of what we looked at the cost estimate. Before I go to that, actually, let me get through this and then we'll come back to Baker. So Baker, large campus, huge network of paths, stairs, access points. You have your kindergarten play space on this side by the parking, your turnaround drop off, and then this play space up here with both the playground, the hard court, and then the athletic field. But when we're looking at this, we're looking at drainage problems in the parking lot. We're looking at those edge conditions. We're looking at the fencing. We're looking at the curb lines as part of that complete renovation. So Baker School, larger site, more site work that's required. This is 3.2 million is our estimate. And then the last one is the Lawrence School. This is different in that it has a larger permitted athletic field as well. That is part of this school campus, and two very large, certainly larger than Heath, playgrounds, open play space, water play, and sort of this circuit walking path, basketball court. This playground, school ground is at 4.5 million. And so what I was asked to do last time was just to provide big picture. What is this number? So it's a little under $14 million for these 4 school playground renovations. And I want to just sort of remind you that we are not talking about just the play equipment itself. This is a full site renovation, which is required based on our assessment of the conditions on these sites. But I also was asked, with that $14 million project, what would it be if Baker and Lawrence were synthetic turf? And that would add about $2 million to each of those projects. I don't know if that, would continue to be an interest or desire. It was something that we were asked, what would that number be if those schools and the school committee wanted to consider that for the future. So I think I'll pause and ask if there are any questions, and also note that we've been talking about these schools for several years now. There's just a lot in the CIP and a lot of different competing needs. We've talked about some different ways to try to approach this. At one point we thought that, does this get bundled into one of the the school overrides to try to bring these school grounds up to par with the other schools that are undergoing renovations? I'd like to sort of understand how the school committee would like to approach these. And otherwise what we're thinking is we need to start to move these forward in the CIP. They're in the CIP and they have been for a few years and out years, which means 7 years or beyond. And so it is time for them to start moving forward if that's going to be the approach, because we really don't want to let these go too much longer.
So you presented this when was this originally presented? Just for
2018.
2018. Okay. So we're 3 years later right now. Okay. Does anybody, I can't see people. Is there more in the presentation or that?
No,
Okay,
there
so maybe we
isn't. And I'll just put it back on Baker so we can talk about that site when you're ready.
Okay, but I can't, if anybody has any questions, you're just going to have to speak up rather than, unless you can see people.
Helen, I think we may have people who are watching who want to raise hands or make a comment, but they're not able to. I don't know if we can.
I think they can put it in the chat. No?
Is that
I don't even
helpful
see a
for
chat.
moment?
I don't see a chat either. Okay. Well, first let's start with the committee and with anybody who's on here, and then I can go over there.
And
Okay.
I, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, but actually I can see the attendees. I'm actually an attendee myself. I am a panelist, so I could facilitate some public comment if you wanted.
I see the attendees here. Oh, we need to put Sam in as a, you know what? I'm just going to promote everybody, and I will call on people if I'm going to put everybody in as to make this easier.
Ellen, why don't you just make a co-host and one of us can manage the people?
Well, actually, Matt is a co-host.
Okay.
I am. I don't see a chat either. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't see a chat either for some reason. So that's why
Robin's been turning the chats off to avoid any question of whether there's side conversation happening between panelists.
I see.
Is there an ability to raise hands though?
I don't see that either, to be honest.
Yeah, when I click on more, I'm not getting that.
So I'm just going to expedite this if it's all right with everybody and allow all the attendees to be inside.
I did just see Erin's thumbnail with a raised
She's
hand.
practicing.
Yeah, so somebody can raise their hand.
At least we could.
I'm helping you through this. Helen.
Okay. Great.
I
Okay.
think once you're a panelist, they'll be able to raise their hands.
Yeah, then they can just talk.
Well, that too.
Or raise their hand or whatever. Okay, so everybody's in now. Does any of the committee have any questions first? Yes, Andy, please.
I have one being kind of new to this process. Erin, what would the school committee need to do to sort of move a particular project forward when it's already in the CIP?
So, and actually one slide that I didn't show that we could go back to briefly, but is we established a design review process with the school committee and Park and Recreation working in collaboration. Do you remember that, Helen? You voted on the process. So I think if we were to follow kind of the typical procedure, I think there was a question as to whether or not it should go in the school CIP or in the public works CIP. We're flexible to really whichever makes the most sense to you and to the town. And I think we've, established sort of what the process is. So we'll work on the write-up for it. We have the cost estimate and can share that. And I would think that no matter what, between Park and Rec and the school committee, you want to be prioritizing and putting these forward together in that you're in agreement on what the priorities are, what's in the scope, and, I would say, presenting them in essence together as sort of co-hosts or co-petitioners for those renovation projects.
So, and it seems to me if it is not a school building that we're renovating, which we have a different process for working together, if it's just the playground, because the building is off 10 years or more, then it would be better for it to be under your CIP and you be in.
Right. Like
in
Lawrence
charge.
and Heath.
Yeah.
They're
you be in
not
charge.
going to happen in the next 10 years.
Yeah. So, and I think that's fine. And I think that Alexandra will be actually presenting to Park and Rec. And so Alexandra, if you could do that, we've actually been holding it in our CIP in future years. Because there were all of these other projects moving forward and we really didn't know, what the funding strategy might be. But I think that she could do that, have that conversation with Park and Rec this evening and at least start to represent them potentially. I think the first year might be FY28 that you're going to see those.
Ooh.
Because of all the other projects in the CIP.
So there are a lot of other playgrounds that are before this.
Oh yeah, this doesn't have a home in the sort of 6-year funding cycle right now.
You said though it was in the CIP.
In future years, it wasn't
Oh,
programmed.
it was just in one of those.
Yeah, it was identified as a need, but it wasn't programmed into a particular year.
Okay, I see Mariah's hand. I see Carla's hand. Go ahead, Mariah.
I might have missed this before someone called me. I had to take the call, but did you talk about overlaying the Baker project with the whatever Baker renovation might be happening in the future?
Not yet.
Okay.
We haven't, and actually that is separate.
What is separate? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So I thought you meant the Baker project that I had for the tennis courts. You meant the
No,
Baker
I meant
project.
right, the bigger project, exactly, combining that one time-wise with whatever happens with the school renovation, which has been forecasted on the school side for some point in the, I don't know when. That's the next item agenda.
One of the next two school projects potentially is Baker or New Lincoln.
Okay.
But I don't think we've gotten there yet since we've got our hands full, but that's one of the things to try to check off by the end of the year is where are we going to start to go in the next few years. But Lawrence and Heath were both renovated this century, and they're not likely going to be done. And for the Lawrence playground, at least from the school building and the kids' perspective, by the nature of the field and the way it's sort of set down, the drainage is not very good, and it's often very muddy and slippery. So for a functional use perspective, there's definitely an interest in having that be synthetic turf. I don't know what the neighbors think. We haven't surveyed folks, but that's definitely of interest.
I think it's of interest at all our schools. I mean, I look at Lincoln and it's a mud bowl,
So yeah,
you know,
Lincoln,
down below,
exact same reasons as Lawrence.
except it's a bowl as opposed to a flat surface. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
which makes that a
Carla.
little less of a candidate truly for the synthetic.
Uh-huh. Well, unless we resurface you know, if you change, if it's not such a bowl,
Yeah.
maybe it would be a candidate. Anyways, Carla? You can't hear you, Carla. You have to get off mute.
Sorry, thank you. Erin, do you happen to have or Alexandra, do you happen to have a ballpark figure in terms of how much money you spend on school ground maintenance and repair every year? I know your maintenance and repair budget is for public spaces, so it's not divided between, you know, what the schools use and what the town uses, but off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head, but we could definitely look at that and, you know, what it costs to sort of with the upkeep of
right
the school grounds. It is a little different because we'll have, you know, money that's going towards renovation of the fence, and the play equipment may be budgeted differently than, let's say, stairs and treads and railings, you know. So I don't know if you meant a particular category like playground alone or the whole site.
Now, what I'm thinking in terms of is coming up with a maintenance budget while we do major renovations of parks and playgrounds, whether it's schools or townwide, that we come up with some idea of what a maintenance budget would involve to make sure that maintenance is adequately funded. Yep. So we don't end up with mud holes. You know, I fully expect playground equipment to either get worn out or worn down, or in some cases a need to redesign it depending on who's using it. But for the physical features, as opposed to kind of the man-made features of a space, and I'm thinking of this in parallel because of what we've run up against in terms of the maintenance and repair budget for school buildings, which is now a huge backlog. And I would love to be able to do some sort of preventive care, preventative maintenance, preventive medicine in terms of our open spaces. So maybe that's just something to file away, and perhaps when we get to discussing the fiscal 20 CIP in this winter, we can talk about it.
I'm just looking to see if anybody else has a question or comment. Yeah, Mariah.
My comment is following on what Carla just said about maintenance budgets and the conversation about muddy bowls and the conversation about synthetic turf fields, which is we obviously had that whole conversation at the high school about the type of field and how that went down. And part of the conversation revolved around the fact that the fields get degraded so quickly, but we're also talking about the importance of not creating heat islands and so forth. And so to whatever extent we can be, and I'm sorry, I'm at work and there's fire engines going by, so I have to stop just for 1 second. to whatever extent we can be funding that maintenance so that it becomes appropriately in the system so that we have the grass. You know, it's not like the trade-off isn't artificial turf or nothing, or just a big dusty field. It's that we have this appropriate maintenance built in. I think that that's great, because I don't particularly want to see large swaths of turf.
Well, Mariah, you should be aware that we've done this before and seen that even despite the best of conditions, if you can't give your fields time off, which none of our fields have, they're not going to grow grass. It's just as simple as that. We've had experts. I remember at the high school, the guy who came and talked about the field and said very clearly, the amount of usage that we have on these fields, you can't grow grass. But that's for another day. Let's not argue it now. I saw Mike Toffel also had his hand up. Mike, you can go ahead and speak if you like.
Sure, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, hello everyone. This is following up on a few
And
other
Mike, maybe
comments.
you can
Introduce
say who you
myself.
are.
Sure, sorry. Mike Toffel, a town meeting member from precinct 8, and interested in topics of capital maintenance. So a couple of things to follow up. So one is with regard to Carla's comment about like a long-term plan on capital maintenance, like it does seem like something's gone awry if we need to put so many multi-million-dollar renovations. We only have schools and 4 of them are sought to be renovated in like a 2 or 3 year span. Like I would have thought that if this happens every 20 years, you'd expect like 1 every 3 years or something like that in order to spread out the investment and the competition for capital improvement dollars with all the other things going on. So that's more just like a comment, like something looks a little off if there's such bunching. And maybe I'm wrong, but that's just a comment. The other is with regard to the dollars that Aaron showed, I think those were first costs. And it seems important with the idea of maintenance to be talking not just about first costs, but also maintenance costs, because that also goes into the question of turf versus grass, because grass, if I remember correctly, has higher annual maintenance costs than turf does. And it sort of evens out to some extent the premium that turf seems to have. Finally, of all people, Aaron is like the town expert in thinking about that type of discussion, in part because of the field master plan that she recently completed as one of a fantastic pieces of work before she transitioned to her new role. So I wonder if, Aaron, you might comment, I'm sorry if I missed it, about how this maintenance fits in with the master plan, the field master planning that your office has done. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say, big picture, I mean, there's the question around natural versus synthetic. And I guess I'll just say we've completed a full needs assessment and master plan for the athletic fields, in addition to an update on the parks, open space and recreation assets master plan. So those are both available on the Parks and Open Space Division website. But we took a very in-depth look at all of the permitted hours of usage on every single athletic field over the course of multiple years, and did an analysis in a whole host of different ways, and then looked at national standards for how many hours of usage natural turf can actually take in terms of sustaining a healthy and safe stand of grass. Because part of having an evenly distributed stand of turf, it creates a stable and safe playing surface, which is what we try to do. And I think that I don't want to dive too deep, which I think I just did, is just to let you know that we far exceed by more than double the amount of hours that and intensity of usage that you would where you would reasonably be able to have healthy natural grass. And I think that's just important for the community to know in terms of setting expectations. It does not mean that you need to go to synthetic. I think it just means you need to understand what what you're going to get with a certain amount of usage. Regardless, we still have aeration, overseeding, and do the best we can to give you the best quality given those conditions and usage. So all of that said, and we can certainly look at maintenance. My hope, Carla, is with improved and sustained capital improvements, if we're not changing and adding new assets and amenities, in some cases, the maintenance kind of balances itself out and will not necessarily increase. And it really depends on what's included in those respective designs if we're going to see a maintenance cost go up.
I'm going to call on Sam Rippon, who many of you don't know yet. He's our new Deputy Superintendent for Administration and Finance. And then I'm going to move us on to maybe 2 minutes on the Baker tennis courts, because that's where we started, and then move us on, because we're just 20 minutes behind right now. Okay, Sam, go for it.
Thank you, and I appreciate the introduction. That's part of the reason I raised my hand is, I wanted to introduce myself, and I come from Dedham Public Schools in a somewhat similar capacity over the past 7 years, and look very much forward to working with all of you. And I know Matt well, and he's a great steward for the district. With respect to fields, don't want to belabor it, but we've faced this in the district I'm at. And I guess my only comments are, given that we're in the Northeast and given the usage, I think turf fields are the way to go, but we're just looking to replace one in Dedham for in the football field and the surrounding track. We got about 10 years of good use out of it, but it's at the end of its useful life, and the price tags is about $900,000 to replace it. But the usage, given the demand, you're right. Unless you can dedicate, we've done natural grass with irrigation, and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and within a short period of time, even with the irrigation and the aeration, the overseeding, all of it, they're torn to bits pretty quickly because of the overuse. And then kids can turn their ankles and God knows what in a field that's torn to shreds. And so I think the advantages far outweigh, it's the cost differential and it getting hot. I think in the 10 years where we were looking with a vendor to put a new turf field in, the technology has grown by eons, and both with the cushioning, and used to be with the first AstroTurf, it was like playing on cement, and it's far from that now. And if a district can afford to do it, I think you need less turf fields to get the amount of hours usage for a comparable amount of natural grass fields. So I guess that's what I would say. If you can do it, I would.
Well, right now, that's not the decision that we're making, but that is going to be a discussion that we will have when we do some of these school playgrounds. We have done it at Driscoll. We're not doing it at the high school, and we'll see what happens in the future.
We did it at Ridley too. It's working out pretty well.
Ridley too, and it has been great. Aaron,
it was very nice meeting you all. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you for joining us today. Can you talk about the tennis courts in 2 minutes?
I can, and can you see the Baker School grounds?
We can.
You
we
can. All right, so let's just look at this. That's not what I want. We'll just go from current slide just to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so in the back of the Baker School property and abutting the Deep Lakely Horse Sanctuary is a bank of 5 tennis courts. The Parks and Open Space Division manages these courts. It has, perimeter fencing around it. And to get to those courts, you either come down these stairs at the back of the Baker School, and then this pathway around, and then you enter from this one point close to Jerry Road, or actually—
Maybe you could use your pointer just to make sure everybody's in the right place.
Oh, you know what, I am. So that must not be part of the view that that
I'm
I
not
have. I
seeing
actually
it.
was using my pointer.
Oh, okay. Right.
So it must
Oh,
not
there it
be.
is. Now
you
I see it.
now. All right, it's too many screens open. It's like 2 different places. So
Yeah.
all right, so pardon the look, but I'm gonna have to look at the screen. So you come down the stairs from the back of the school. There's an entrance to the court here. Or you continue and follow around along the path. There's an entrance to the court here, and then you can come out onto the sort of backside of Jerry Road, Hancock Village, or continue into, this is the primary entrance to the Deep Lakely Horse Sanctuary. So as I mentioned, we have funds that was already voted on by town meeting for its tennis and basketball court renovation. We prioritized the courts, and this was the next bank of courts that need to be renovated, and they do need to be renovated. We put that on hold due to the 9th school study, and we're ready to resume it. We pulled together a project that is rebuilding the base and rebuilding these courts, but again, sort of putting them back in place, and then all the support infrastructure in terms of the fences. We're adding a trench drain to try to catch water before it comes off this back side of the tennis courts, because we have, we're in the buffer zone of wetlands within the Deep Lakely Horse Sanctuary. So the Conservation Commission asked that we try to catch that sort of first flush of water in that trench drain and slow that water down, and hopefully, we get the solids to settle out, and then cleaner water can go out to the sanctuary. The stairs, the pathway, the railings are all in need of replacement. And getting to this site is actually challenging. You can't really see it so much from this plan view, but the Baker School is sort of up high at Beverly Road. And then you go down, and getting to the Baker School courts is sort of far below that grade. And all the construction access has to happen through kind of a use agreement with Chestnut Hill Realty. And so while we're in that location, we thought it was really important to rebuild those stairs, improve the access from Jerry Road, and make an accessible entrance into the sanctuary. So this is the project. It's the courts, but while we're there, we just want to improve movement to and through that space. Chestnut Hill Realty has said that they're interested in partnering with us to make that happen. And so we are working with them. And at this point, we did put this out to bid. The price came in over our estimated budget. Prices are very high right now in terms of overall construction, but we also think that it really is not a favorable time to be bidding. There's so much work out there right now. So we're going to repackage it and put it out to bid this winter for a summer 22 construction. And that is the plan.
What was the budget and what did it come in at?
Oh, our budget was around, I want to say 650, and it came in at 900.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we
Okay.
just think that's enough of a difference that we really want to, we're going to value engineer. Was there something that was not right? And that's even in terms of, there are a whole host of ways for us to even make sure that the right contractors are looking at the bid when it's available.
Mm-hmm.
So we think we didn't get the right contractors bidding as well.
Okay, great. Are there any questions? I think we can take this down
Oh,
so I
yeah.
can see
Yep.
people.
And
Are there
I
any
do-
questions?
Yeah,
Go
I mean,
ahead.
there's questions further, but I also have a question for the committee in terms of with the Baker School renovation, is there any reason why this project would impact that in any way?
Well, I know at
vice versa.
one point, there was a discussion when we were enlarging the Baker School to possibly use part of that space to enlarge. So we would have the field that could be left alone. At this point, with our population, I don't think that that's a question anymore. I think it's so far out that it's hard to know. And it sounds like the steps and are a hazard, or could be. And the tennis courts are they usable even?
Not competitively, but they all need to be done.
Does our tennis team use those courts?
They have in the past, but they really prefer to use Waldstein and Lawrence now. And maybe that would change if this were renovated.
I see. Okay. Matt?
Yeah, so when we get to the point of a new Baker or renovated Baker, we'll look at, in all likelihood, building brand new and renovating in place. Those are the two main things. And sometimes it's a combination of renovation and new. So to your question about the field is, do you renovate it? Because we wouldn't really want to undo any work that was just done or that was 5 years old or anything like that. So, and I understand that's your question, is what you're asking. I'm not sure we're ready to answer that in the near future, but to Helen's point, it seems like right now Baker's a 4-section school, and it seems like it's probably likely to stay that way based on recent enrollment and enrollment sort of stabilizing from after a 13-year growth.
But were you asking about the tennis courts or about the playgrounds?
Only the tennis courts. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't something that you had your eye on. But at this point, we're only talking about the tennis courts and access from.
Not likely that we would build a new school down there on top of the tennis courts. That wouldn't be too functional with the hill and our neighbors there at Hancock Village. I can't see anybody saying that's the way to go.
Okay. So it was voted by the advisory and by town meeting. So the monies are there. You're holding them over for this year, correct?
Correct.
So there's really not much that I think we as a school committee need to do.
No, I think just to know and to be, just to know that we're coordinating. Of course, I reached out to the principal, I reached out to Matt. So, but to know that this is coming and, for me, I'm just coordinating that with you, communicating it. And if you did have any concerns, to let me or let Alexandra know.
And cross your fingers for lower bids.
Absolutely.
Well, I can't get much higher, so.
Never say never.
Surprise. I should be quiet. Okay. I think unless there's anything else really urgent with Erin, I really appreciate what you've laid out for us here. Erin, I would ask you to send these slides. I know that Robin has them somewhere, but if you could send them again to her, she can include it as part of the documentation of this meeting.
I will do that right now.
Okay. I'm sorry, Helen, I think before we moved on to the tennis courts, I don't think you saw Carol Levin had her hand up about something regarding the previous topic.
It wasn't important. I was just going to say that you're going to have to revisit the health issues associated that are developing with turf fields before you go all in on that, especially.
I think we did that, Carol.
Yeah, it's just something that keeps on evolving.
Absolutely.
That's all I wanted to say. Nothing critical.
Agreed.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you all for your time. Wonderful to see you.
Thank you. And Alexandra, thank you. We'll look forward to seeing you. We always like seeing you, Erin, but I think you probably have a few things on your plate there, right?
Just a couple.
Yeah.
Looking forward to
you
working
all.
with you all. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Okay, we're going to move on now. And I'm just, okay, I'll give this over to Matt now. The discussion of the, well, we have two pieces of the capital master plan and the BEEP leases, which are sort of integrated, actually, two pieces. The capital master plan, which we had a while ago that, as Mariah pointed out, we needed more in it. Mariah, are you still with us?
I'm here, but off video. I'm between work and home.
Okay, no problem. But if you have something to say, just chime in. But I'm worried about the time right now. It's already 5 o'clock. And the other items, there's a couple things we need to vote. So I'm wondering, why don't we do the leases and then do the rest of the items and then possibly at the end, go back to the capital master plan? Does that sound reasonable?
I think
Okay,
it makes sense.
Okay, great. Let's do that. So Matt, would you be willing to present the leases and where we are with those? And this is more for people to remember, for Sam to know. And
Okay, yeah, I
thoughts about
can
them.
do that. I'll see if I can move us through fairly quickly.
That'd be great.
I'm gonna share my screen here. I sent out a memo and I'm going to summarize it briefly. We have 3 leases. We lease space basically because we do not fit in all of our buildings. We lease space for BEEP or pre-K classrooms at Temple Emeth, Temple Obahey, and Maimonides School. We refer to them as BEEP at Putterham, BEEP at Beacon, and 2 Clark Road. But so we have our landlords, our use, and then what the budget is for next year. When we can end the leases, we have 2 10-year leases and 1 5-year lease. The 10-year leases were 3 years initially, and then with 7 option years remaining. And then Maimonides was a 4-year lease with 1 option year. So you can see the dollar amounts there. And then let me just move that out of the way. I summarized some options here about what to consider and how we think about moving forward as we try to get out of the leases, because we would prefer to be in our own space. I'm sort of paraphrasing from school administration and prior school committee meetings, as well as taking some guidance from advisory. So for Temple Emeth, for example, Putterham, the south end of town, we rent about 9,800 square feet and have about 6 classrooms there. We're going to be moving out of the Baldwin School, if all goes well this winter, and we'd like to, consider the option of renovating that space and seeing if that's a match for BEEP. We've got to explore that a little bit more, but that's definitely an option. And could we be moving in there for August 23, or the second option would be August 24? Or if that doesn't seem to work, we continue to lease the BEEP classroom space from Temple Emeth. I believe they'd be very happy to have us till we find a better plan. Next would be Temple Obahey or BEEP at Beacon. That's in the north end of town. We added 2 classrooms at Ridley a couple of years ago, and we're going to be adding 3 with Driscoll. And that would replace the 5 classrooms that are there, but that doesn't really help grow the BEEP program. And BEEP had sort of stagnated for a while as the school department grew and sort of expanded in place and pushed some of the BEEP classrooms out. So we could, consider that as one option, is to getting out of the BEEP at Beacon lease with Temple Obahey for September of 2023. Or we could wait until Pierce is finished, assuming that project proceeds fully. It's in the study phase right now. We have not voted a final project and do not have one yet at this point. But that would be in the early designs, there's 3 classrooms there. So that would be 8 classrooms to replace the 5 rentals sort of on the north end of town for Temple Obahey. And then I'll call it the largest lease and the largest largest hurdle to clear is 2 Clark Road, the Maimonides lease. We need to start considering options for moving out in summer of 2024 or summer of 2025, because there's a chance that we may not be able to stay, and we have about 36 office staff and 6, potentially 7 BEEP classrooms that are going to be used and in the space. And as you saw, that's about $1.25 million that we're paying this year, and the lease goes up basically $1 per square foot every year that we're in the lease. That's what we've agreed to. So one of the ways that I think we need to discuss with the town and with this committee is the funding source using the ARPA funds and the 34 million approximately that the town's receiving in one-time funds, and how we can use this to help sort of stabilize our capital requests and get more of our programs operating under our roofs. And discussing this a little bit with Regina, because it affects her program quite a bit, actually. She was invited to be here as well. So at this point, hopefully that was a quick enough summary for folks, and I will turn it back over to the chair. Helen, you're on mute.
Thank you. Regina, I'm wondering if you have anything that you might want to add before I open it up.
Sure. Thank you, Matt and Helen. And I recall a few months ago, Andy had asked me at a previous Capitol meeting about BEEP and sort of the vision for BEEP. And for many years, the vision has been that the BEEP classrooms return to all of the elementary schools as they had been. In addition to having that, it is useful to have 1 or 2 sites, such as the Lynch Center, where there is some specialized equipment available for students such as our students who have multiple physical issues, a fully accessible playground that's available and maintained by the Parks Department at Lynch Center, some of the sensory gym equipment that's available at our site. So the combination of being in the schools as well as having 1 or 2 buildings such as Lynch where those can be accommodated is really ideal. Our families are part of the elementary community, and those classrooms are highly desirable by families for BEEP. In addition to that is something that I've also mentioned a few times at different public meetings. I do think that we do need to think about Brookline High School a little bit more, not only for BEEP, but for the high school students. We are to the best of my knowledge, most high schools, and certainly the high schools that we compare ourselves to, have child study programs with a child lab in their high school building. In the past, we've had students walk over to the Lynch Center or to Clark Road. It's been very challenging for the high school students. It's enriching for both the high school and the pre-K students to have that available. So I would encourage the Capital Subcommittee to think about that perspective too, being able to integrate us back into the high school. There was at one point, we had 3 classrooms at BHS. Most high schools have 1 or 2 pre-K classrooms. So that's something in a long-range capital plan to consider and think about.
Are there any thoughts, questions from the Capital Subcommittee? Or
I have a question about Regina's last comment just now.
Yes.
Was there any consideration of what was just discussed during the actual planning of the current renovation to bring?
Yeah, there was actually, Vicki Milstein was principal at the time, and I know that she had some discussions over the years. At that point, the enrollment in the high school was burgeoning, and it was a more challenging discussion to have. So I don't know if it would be something that's easier conversation now. To be honest, I have only mentioned this to Anthony on a very casual basis, once or twice. I've mentioned it at a few public meetings, but it is something that I think we do need to think about.
I have a second question, if I could, Helen.
Sure.
If Maimonides, the Maimonides lease does not continue, what happens to BEEP?
Good question. Very good question. We have 2 years to figure it out. 2 or 3?
3 tops.
3 tops.
If
Well,
we don't figure it out, I'm what I call awfulizing right now.
Yes,
If no
yes,
other
yes,
space
yes.
materializes.
No, it's a
Yes.
good question. So in the memo that I summarized, I noted in there, whether or not we consider doing something with Newberry or finding some other space to lease, whether we put it back out to bid early or and that we start moving some of the BEEP classrooms that were once in the schools back into the schools, with the high school and Heath is sort of the first viable options. I don't want to say necessarily last out, first in, but that seems to be the case where it's functional and where there may be space available in those buildings based on enrollment.
Right. We had built into the project at Heath in 2015, 2 BEEP classrooms, actually.
Right.
Carla, I think, was first, and then Carol.
So how are you fixed for office space these days in terms of having to lease office space? Because that's
Matt
what
showed you his space. I don't know if you realize that.
We're having a visual tour of Matt's
that
shared classroom office space.
Right.
Well,
that was an elementary classroom. Now it houses 4 people, and that's what we do with the classrooms that we're not using
at Clark Road, right?
At Clark Road, and
my thinking is when you give up Clark Road, or when the lease runs out for Clark Road, you're going to be needing to find office space.
Very much so.
Right. So before you start assigning space at the high school for BEEP classrooms, if BEEP classrooms can be accommodated elsewhere, I guess what I'm saying is,
Sure.
I personally would much prefer to see offices be moved back into the high school, particularly the ones that were there before. Such as BEEP classrooms were there before, Steps to Success was there before, a whole bunch of things were there before. But better to do that than to have to pay for renting office space outside of school buildings or town hall.
Understood. Go ahead, Helen. We probably have the same
Carla,
thought.
I don't think this is an either or, because it's just as expensive and harder to find good classroom space than office space.
But what it sounds to me is like there are potentially there's potential capacity in either existing buildings because of shifts in enrollment, or will be in new buildings. So my strong preference is to get out of leased spaces, simply because the rents are chewing up huge amounts of money in the CIP, as you well know. Plus, Helen, you've expressed numerous times that you would like to stop discussing leases.
Got it. No, Carla, I agree. And I actually, at Pierce, we're looking at a possible the Steps offices being there. So we're looking at in all of the buildings. I'm sure in Driscoll, we're going to find a few office spaces possibly for people too. So we have to do it logically so that it makes sense. But we also, no, you're right. Let's put it that way. Carol?
So following up on your comment about doing it logically, one of the, my recollection is alternatives being talked about for Pierce ends up giving us the historic Pierce building back for other municipal purposes, which I like. As far as for things for BEEP, the excess office place, and though I haven't been part of a conversation, I still want to talk about those parking lots and potentially the public health building as an alternative site for Pierce, and whether we could get some more open space and access to this. So that's a long way of my saying, I think we need to be looking at the timing of the alternatives. And as Aaron was saying about making sure that the tennis court work wasn't going to be money invested prior to chewing them up. And as far as the American Recovery, the ARP funds being used for these capital things, it doesn't strike me, my limited understanding, and I just, did the webinar, that building these classrooms, capital investment in these classrooms or office space is really the intention of the funds.
Is or is not the intention?
Pardon?
Just to be clear, is the intention, or it was not the intention as you understood
Was
it?
not the
Okay.
intention. Whether or is another matter. I do see that you could use those funds. I mentioned this earlier to Carla, for saying the geothermal wells for the Driscoll School. I do see it as for some of the other capital investments we'd be needing to be making in ventilation, et cetera. But as far as creating new permanent classrooms or office spaces, I have concerns about that. So.
Okay, thank you. I didn't know there was a webinar on it. I wish I would have known. I would have liked to have listened.
It was something, and if I can find it, I'll send you the link to it. It was, the Mass Municipal, whatever, Finance Association.
Okay, all right. Any other comment? Andy, yes.
Yeah, do you have a question for Regina and Matt about the first thing that you brought up, Matt, which is the possibility of giving up the lease for Beep at Putterham and moving people to Baldwin. I guess my scale of distance is based on living in North Brookline without a car, but those two places seem very far apart to me. So like, would the families that currently are served at Putterham be able to continue if it got moved to Baldwin?
In general, you're driving to either one. They're both sort of in the south end of town. It's hard to find, another place that's suitable, I'll say within 100 or 200 yards of any place where we are, right? Like Beep at Beacon, committee heard some very strong support to maintain that lease. But, Driscoll, Ridley and Pierce, sort of surround Beep at Beacon, or you could say that's Beacon would be the fourth corner. It's really hard to find sort of an exact match for existing locations, but Regina knows the families and has been there for drop off umpteen times.
Yeah, I know that Baker's very overcrowded too, but we used to have 2 classrooms at Baker. My hope was that if we could have a classroom at Baker someday again, if there's a renovation, that would be really helpful. And Andy, I'd say it's about 2.5 miles. And it is true. Mostly everyone in Brookline, South Brookline has cars, many do. But we do have quite a few families who drop off their child at Baker and then walk over to Putterham. It's about a 1/2 mile.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't want to do something that makes it suddenly inaccessible to many families who have come to depend on it. But yeah, especially if the alternative seems like to stay with a relatively problem-free, like stable lease, right? Where we don't have to share the space.
Yes, but I think, it is more walkable, the Putterham, but it is walkable to the other one too. It's farther. It's much farther. You'd go down Beverly and up. It's not great. It's not great. What can I say? But on the other hand, we need to, it's a temple. It's a religious facility. And I don't feel right if we can avoid having a religious, we can't always do that. And we do the best we can. But I don't think it's right to have a public school preschool in a religious facility. So I think it's a discussion we need to have more and figure out what makes sense. David.
To me, the issue about Baldwin versus Putterham, I hear the concern about access. However, I do think as someone who lives roughly in that side of town, pretty much everyone in precincts 15 and 16, or almost everyone, would have a vehicle because there are not a lot of areas that are super walkable in the southern part of town. And I also look at the reality that we already have Baldwin. We wouldn't have to be paying a lease if we utilized Baldwin for vehicles. And that could be a significant cost savings that we could allocate in other areas if we were able to have preschool at Baker down the line, but also at Baldwin, which we already have. Whereas with Putterham, we do have to pay significant money to keep that lease going. Also, the Baldwin neighborhood, there are some families who have public school children, so it would be walkable for them, just for a different group of parents.
And I have to say, the outdoor space at Baldwin is spectacular. The indoor space needs work. That's another agenda item, but the outdoor
and once
space
we
is beautiful.
renovate it, it'll be even better. Okay, I'm looking at our time. I'm sorry, guys, but I think we need to move on to the last grouping of things that we have here. Possible uses of the American Rescue Plan, and I hope, Carol, you'll disabuse us if we can't use it for some of these things, which I think you've already started to do.
I'll send you the link now and you can share it with the rest of the committee.
Sure, for sure. But some of the things that we've taught Matt, well, let's start with the first issue. And Regina, if you don't want, let me see. We already talked about Baldwin, so I guess that's, we don't need to talk about that anymore. I think, Regina, if you want to, you can stay with us or you can leave if you want. So you have a choice.
Thank you.
But I do want to talk, Matt Gillis and I, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, how many years was it? When we were at Webster Place still.
So that was 2 years ago.
2 years ago. Discussed electric buses and actually had for the schools purchasing electric buses to use for our transportation, and had a company come and talk with us. And Matt, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. So basically I just ran an analysis because in a prior job, the school system that employed me, we were the owner and operator of the transportation. So we bought the buses, the vans, hired the drivers, maintained the vehicles, all of it. So I sort of had experience with doing that, and then just went back to that. Costing out electric buses, financing them, hiring the drivers, benefits, maintenance costs, all of that. And would need to sort of refresh that, and actually, because Helen, nudged me on this the other day. Turns out that there is an open house down in Providence today and tomorrow. So I'll be going there tomorrow morning to
great.
See advancements and changes and get pricing refreshment and cost refreshment for electric buses, which seem to be growing in popularity. Where 2 to 3 years ago they were a bit of a novelty, and now there should be slightly more common. There should be more than 2 or 3 school systems in the Commonwealth at this point that are trying them out, or at least in New England, as long as it's used regionally, dealing with the same weather conditions that we are. That gives us kind of a good basis where to go from. So that was another potential consideration for the ARPA funds. But one of the biggest hurdles and obstacles was, where are we going to park them? But that was well before we had Newberry, so maybe there's some space there to park some buses. I mean, that's another thing that,
and charge them. It's park and have charging stations.
Right, and then I guess some of the maintenance would probably still happen in the DPW garage, and those folks would probably need some training on full electric vehicles and buses.
There's nothing to do with an electric vehicle. Having owned one for 2 years and never had it in the shop, there's really not much you have to do.
Okay.
Except check the tires and the brakes.
Yeah, those those things I imagine still wear down, but, okay. Again, so this is stuff that we're learning about. And to Andy, your point, and David, your point about Baldwin, that building is naturally ventilated, needs new roof, new windows, things of that nature. So when by naturally ventilated, that means you open the windows and the doors to bring in fresh air. There's no mechanical air in the space. That's the type of thing that we would consider some of this ARPA funds to upgrade the space for. And whether we use that for classrooms or for office space, we own the property. I can't imagine we continue to rent as much as we rent, and not utilize the space. We utilize the rest of our space. So, but we are going to need to make some upgrades to the building, as we certainly tabled it when it was on doing anything to it, including I think $1,200 worth of painting that Charlie Simmons is still licking his wounds over for getting chastised at a advisory committee for leaving that on his list. We haven't really done much of anything there, and we need to do something for the space.
Carla, I'm going to call on you in a minute. Matt, I'm wondering if you can tell us what our costs for busing are right now, what our contract is, and how many buses we use.
We use 6 buses a day, 2 at the high school and 4 for the elementaries. And I want to say it's $480 a day. So it's getting close to $90,000 a year for a bus. It's 80 some odd thousand. I could do the math. I just haven't done it in a little bit.
Okay. And that includes the driver.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the company's overhead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Carla?
so it's 86.4 per day per bus for a 180-day school year, plus additional costs for athletic trips, field trips, things of that nature, summer school.
I have a question for Mariah, actually, and that is whether you've received any notice about a town school partnership meeting. I'm thinking that the use of the Recovery Act funds, how they get divvied up, I believe, is going to be discussed by the town school partnership at some point. And
the answer is I've asked several times about it, and I haven't gotten a response.
Okay, so time for more nudging. And my other question is for everybody, does anybody know what's happening to the Oak Street townhouses, whether they're on the market, whether they've been sold?
I asked, I understood they were putting them on the market, whether it went on the market. I don't think they've been sold.
Okay.
But I don't know.
I think this discussion of Baldwin made me think about.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Sure, but that's the town that, I know the select people voted it. What has happened?
Town meeting authorized the select board. The select board said, yes, they would. I know it's not, just handing it over to Hammond Residential and asking them to sell the properties. I think it has to be done through the usual open procurement process approach. So, okay, I will try and find out.
Yeah, I think we need to sort of follow up on having a town school partnership meeting sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
Carol, I wanted to ask you, since you're now the expert on ARP funds, would the electric buses fall into that sort of category, do you think?
That's a great question. There's some catch-all there about climate and sustainability. So I think, maybe, but I've just sent you the link and I will look at it more. This Massachusetts Municipal Association that has all the guidance on the uses for it.
Right. Okay, great.
What's the life expectancy of those, Matt? Do you have any idea?
For an electric bus, the batteries were about 7 years. Okay. And then that's fairly expensive to replace the batteries. I couldn't get a firm price on that the last time around, but the cost of a new bus was around, diesel bus was around $90,000. An electric bus was around $360 to $380. So it's a significant cost increase for the initial capital outlay.
Right.
But if you compare this, for instance, to cars, gas and regular cars, I was just reading in Consumer Reports, after, 10 years, you've come out ahead because the lack of maintenance costs and the lack of gas costs,
Right. It's just having that money when there's no Recovery Act funds, if they are eligible for purchase that way.
Once you get into the bus and van ownership business, the real savings generally comes after you've cared for your vehicle and it's exceeded its average useful life, and you squeeze a few more years out of it because you've been the one maintaining it and taking care of it.
But and I understand all of that. It's just having the cash.
Right, to start.
Some.
It's a big commitment. It's not like, we're going to try this for a few years. You're in it for a good 15 plus.
The other thing we were talking about, this doesn't have to be just a school bus. It could be used for the senior center during the day, moving seniors around. It could be used in the summer by Parks and Rec for their camps. So there's ways of actually using this for more than just the schools and as a town benefit.
I also wonder if there aren't other federal programs.
Well, that's
that are
another
going
question.
To be funding and encouraging the transition to electric buses.
And I think that's something we definitely need to look into. If
Well,
this is
that's a
something,
question I'll ask tomorrow, because the salespeople know the price is always a hurdle. So whenever they can get somebody else to subsidize it, I expect they're going to tell me pretty quickly.
all right, so to be continued on this subject, unless there's somebody else who has something to say, and I don't see any hands or, yes,
Andy has his
Andy, I'm
hand.
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, if I could actually ask Carol a question as well. Just I'm wondering, I'm trying to understand, like, what's the criterion according to which you think that they're digging a geothermal well or upgrading ventilation is an okay way to use the ARPA money, but increasing classroom capacity would not be?
So this was a webinar that was a couple weeks ago. There was something about sustainability and climate initiatives as a specific category of funds that you could spend. I know that there is categories of providing services that were cut because of COVID, but that's not what we're talking about. I don't, and you aren't allowed to do things like, my understanding is, pay debt service on things that you were already encumbered to do. It was more paying for services that were cut. I didn't get the impression that it was for general capital investments. It was only capital investments in certain buckets. And replacing leased classrooms with owned classrooms, I'm not sure how, not saying it couldn't be done, but that wasn't my takeaway impression. So.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay, so
Helen, Sam has his hand up too. I don't know if
Sam,
it's
do you
for
have
this
your hand
or
up? I thought that was from before.
I don't know.
Yeah, it didn't get lowered, but no,
I
my
thought
hand,
so.
yeah.
Okay.
I guess
Okay,
I'll
if you could
lower
just
it.
lower it, maybe then we'll.
There we go.
Perfect. Good going. Well, then let's move on to the issue of air conditioning, which obviously this year brought out in full spades the issues that we have with some of our buildings and the lack of air conditioning, or conditioned air, as we call it sometimes, in some of the buildings, and the difficulty of maintaining school during that kind of situation. And this may fall into the bucket that Carol was talking about, that does rise because it has to do with ventilation, et cetera. Matt, do you want to?
Sure. So we air condition in the traditional sense only a few spaces in the schools, usually a place or two for the kids to cool off, auditorium / multi-purpose room, or cafeteria, library. And then the office space where the principal's office is, because, you know, they work through the summer. For the most part, we don't do air conditioning. Recently, we started going with displaced air. For some reason, the engineers don't like it, but I'll call it air conditioning light. So when it's 98 degrees outside and you want to turn it to 64 degrees in the classroom, you can't do that with displaced air. There's still a chiller. It's a different engineered system, but you can get it down to, you know, about 20, 22 degrees, maybe lower than what it is outside. So when it's 95 and you walk in and it's 74, it might not be perfect, but it feels wonderful compared to what you were dealing with outside. And we've had 0 complaints at the Ridley School. And I can tell you the high school basketball coach has already asked if he can run practice there all summer for the week that he runs his camp, and couldn't use the high school because it was closed, because he was like, it's like 75 degrees in the gym. This is the best environment we've ever practiced in. We're going to do that at the Driscoll School. It's also happening at 22 Tappan and the STEM building have displaced air. And maybe that's something we look at to start adding into other places. We did add air conditioning to the 3rd floor of the Lincoln School, the 3rd floor of the Lawrence School. We added it to the 4th floor of the high school when we removed the air conditioning from Devotion and needed a place to put it. It's on the 4th floor of the high school, and it is on part of the 2nd floor of the Heath School where it just bakes. For some reason, the Baker School, the 3rd floor, did not get done. But as everybody understands and is well aware, the buildings in New England are made to hold the heat. And once it gets in and rises, the top floor is by far the warmest. And so we sort of started from there and wanted to work our way down. I did have on order some portable air conditioners. And then with the last heat wave, you know, they sold out before we could get the purchase order into the vendor. And they've been trying to offer me, I'll say, alternatives that are not quite as acceptable since, to get us to manage through summer programs in those really hot times. I am definitely interested in the geothermal idea. That's still potentially an option for Driscoll, if this is really an option to use the funds for, and that's what the Driscoll School Building Advisory is interested in, and the rest of the town. It's about $2.2 million. Something that we need to take a look at rather quickly, and make sure that that's still a possibility. But back to the air conditioning, you know, displaced air is kind of how we've been moving to, because it seems to meet our needs is much more cost efficient than air conditioning. And I call it air conditioning light. Nobody seems to really know the difference, but we notice the difference when we're trying to initially capitalize it.
Mariah.
So could I just recap what I think you said, Matt, in that if we had a quote, I'm going to call it a quote unquote policy, because it's not a real policy, but if we had a quote unquote policy about where we put air conditioning or displaced air, it's essentially administrative offices, some sort of cooling center equivalent, and then top floors, which tend to collect heat. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So
okay.
That's for older
each
buildings.
Right, for each prior building, generally the building committee that was there looked at the cost of air conditioning.
We're talking about retrofits, I mean.
Right. So where they put it was library, cafeteria, places where kids could go in and out of and get a chance to cool off for the few hot days a year that it's there. If you get a period break to cool off, that's kind of helpful to get through the day. And then offices or the auditorium for the schools that had auditoriums, those are generally air conditioned.
So then
just one to add to that, offices in the secretary's contract, I think, and a couple contracts, spaces need to be air conditioned. I think it's the secretary's contract is the one that states that.
Okay. And then, so to what extent are we compliant with our quote unquote policy? Like which spaces if we were to prioritize sort of what we were doing here, do we have the list of spaces that don't meet that general criteria, and then we could price those out? Or
We haven't really created one. So like, for example, the Heath and the high school auditoriums are not air conditioned or air cooled, but Lincoln is, New Lincoln is,
Runkle is.
Runkle is, things have kind of evolved over time. And when we have a new building project, we don't immediately revert to an old standard if the committee at the time decides that they want to make an improvement. So then we try to work our way through the other buildings. So this
so is
one-time
that
funds,
something we could do? Like put a list together?
yeah, we can put a list together. I mean, I've already got sort of floor plans and maps.
I think Charlie has some of that actually, because last year we started to talk about it, because sometimes there are students who, because of whatever specific conditions they have, they need to be in a space that's under 75 degrees or under whatever. So some classrooms were done just because of that.
With portable air conditioners or with ductless splits, to be able to manage, individual classrooms. But yes, we can come up with a list. How prioritized. I think it's really going to be based on where folks complain, and where the heat is the worst. Like there's one classroom that is actually above the kitchen and has a roof next to it, and it just probably adds another 8-10 degrees heat on it that I discovered with this last round of the heat wave. And that's a room we should probably do something about more so than some other places in the system.
So why don't we sort of put the rest of this discussion, unless people have more questions that they want Matt to investigate, off until the next meeting when we will have Charlie to do the CIP and to be able to discuss air conditioning and maybe put some numbers to it too. I don't know if that's feasible. Charlie may be able to do that.
Yeah.
So that we know what we're talking. Are we talking in the hundreds of thousands? Are we talking in the millions? Are we talking, what are we talking about? For what?
I have another question too beyond that. I mean, some of this, like what Matt just described, like there's a room, I didn't catch which building that is, but wherever it is, there's a room somewhere that requires this because it's just too hot. And so my first question is, do we have any way to, rather than just to be complaint driven, and then in 2 years from now when the ARP money is gone, someone else is complaining, but they actually all have the same, like someone complained when it was 90 degrees and someone else didn't. And so now we've missed an opportunity. Is there a way for us to be a little bit more rigorous in our sort of identification of which rooms really are an issue? I don't know if it's even something like, do the rooms all have, because they're all operated by central control systems, right? I'm dredging up the fall in conversations of MERV, and like, isn't there something like, do they have any sense? No, I understand, but like, aren't there central control systems? Do they have any way to take, like, do they have in-room temperature sensors where they can tell us? Okay, so is that data we can collect?
They can view that on like a floor plan at, I don't think you're really going to go be able to get the history out of it, but they can look at during
real
hot
time
days,
and
see.
That's what I'm wondering is like, can we wait for the next, like, I think like Friday is supposed to be 90. I don't know when the next 90-degree day is, but like, can we use that point in time data to at least be an indicator of where people might not have complained? And then my second question related to that is, at what point in time does it make sense, rather than doing smaller spaces, to just do a larger space, even because there's some sort of economics of cooling systems where it might cost, I'm making this up, but maybe it costs the same amount to set up two systems for a floor that it does to set up the entire floor. And I don't know, I'm just sort of throwing that out there as something to consider, is maybe we want to be a bit more expansive, or even if it's a small price differential, like just what that trade-off is in terms of recommendations on that. Again, because this is sort of we all hope it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, we never want to go through this again. So, but how do we leverage those funds as far as we can?
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Mariah. And I think that Charlie will have a lot of that because we have discussed this before in Capital, before you came on to the school committee. And where we were starting, why we did those 3 buildings that we did. There was a reasoning behind it. So yes.
Great.
We'll work out. I think we'll devote a big part of the next meeting to that along with the CIP. Okay. Anybody else have anything else they want to add to that conversation? So Carla and Carol, do you know what's happening at Newbury?
Good question. Town meeting, I believe, voted that a study committee should be formed to look at Newbury as a possible site or its suitability for affordable housing.
Okay.
And I think that's the only thing I can tell you about Newbury, except that Charlie is using it for temporary quarters for his craftspeople and their equipment.
Okay.
I know it hasn't bubbled up as a possible site for the ice skating rink. The consultant looked at various places in Brookline and I think decided just to, for the time being, at least stick with Lars Anderson. I don't know what's happening with the outdoor pool study.
So basically the building is going to be there for the next 3 or 4 years at least. More than likely.
If the current pace is, if the past predicts the future, I think that's a pretty safe assumption.
Okay. Now, and just in terms of office space is what we were thinking of it for.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just looking at the time right now. And we have about 15 minutes more. Does anybody want to add anything to any of the things that we've already discussed? And I'm counting on you, Matt, to, yes, Matt.
Yeah, just consider the options for getting out of the leases. We need to, if we're going to go to Newbury or if we're going to put an RFP out or whatever, some early direction from the committee gives us a more competitive advantage to figure out what's the next best move. If we wait too long, we wind up getting stuck with whatever price landlords want to give us.
Okay. Mariah?
I wanted to make this comment earlier, so I'm glad we're looping back to it. I feel like with this question of space, right now, we don't have a strong vision. And I think that it goes back to this master plan, but also sort of what is our vision? Like I said earlier, what happens to BEEP if we don't have this? It's like, oh, but there has to be a sort of a consequence or a vision, like I'll say a negative consequence or a positive vision for what we want for these spaces. If we don't, then, it's very possible that if Maimonides, that space doesn't continue or any of these other spaces, but it's not just how many spaces we want, but where do we want them in town? Do we have this as a committee, a sense for the strong issue of walkability and geographic diversity and accessibility? These are all things that we need to talk through and put out there for the community to buy into. Otherwise, I feel like there's really very little point in, saying, oh, well, we need this or we need that. We need to just propose something that people can understand and buy into and commit to as a community.
I think we're getting close to being due for a new facilities master plan. Our last one's 2009. A lot's changed since then.
Yes.
Just to toss another idea out there, that I was cleaning out emails from a million years ago and found one from 2013 from Vicki Milstein. Helen, do you remember the group that used to meet either at the Community Foundation or the Teen Center? And there at one point was an idea about putting having BEEP classrooms as part of a family education center in High Street.
Oh, yes. Yes, I actually just discussed this recently with, who was it?
Was
We
it at
just
that
had-
working group?
No, it
Oh.
wasn't the word. It's called it was Beep Connections. Regina, I'll let you talk about it in a second. And then now it's the advisory council, the early childhood advisory. It still meets actually, virtually right now. And we have discussed the High Street. It came up in a conversation with
Raul, it did come up with
Raul and the
Raul.
Housing Authority about spaces for things, and that space is still available. It's not a highly desirable space, and it's a basement space without windows, and that's the hardest part about it. But go ahead, Regina, you were gonna.
No, I think you summarized it. These discussions have recently come up again around the housing issue for access to BEEP for students who live in housing. And there was a Head Start program at both Egmont Street and High Street. Both facilities are, as they would say, at the garden level, but that means in the basement.
And what about Dummer Street? Nothing there?
I've been here 32 years. I don't remember us ever having a classroom at Dummer Street.
I don't think
Well,
there's
it's a newer building, so.
Mhm.
you
they
probably
have a
wouldn't have had
community
classroom.
room. I think it's a community room there, but it's not a
That
BEEP
doesn't work.
classroom type room.
Actually, the facility at High Street is quite large. It has multiple classrooms and some therapy spaces. I'd say 2 or 3 classrooms. It needs a major renovation. At one point, Vicki Milstein was soliciting support from a private donor to support that project. It was a corporate donor. The Brookline Community Foundation was involved with it at the time.
There's no opportunity for window wells. I mean, I think about the fact that Brimmer and May has a lot of classrooms underground. And I had a tour a number of years ago thinking I would be feeling extremely claustrophobic. And it was extraordinary how much light there was because they managed to dig out a plaza below sea level. But that became a source of light for the classrooms, and it really works well. So I'm just wondering whether anything like that would be possible for these garden level spaces.
Anything, as some architects will say, anything is possible. It's just if you can afford to pay for it.
Right.
You know,
Well,
I mean, there are other issues.
cheaper
too,
than buying Maimonides, right?
Yeah, no, not a good comparison. Not a good comparison.
I think
at
it was
all.
a joke.
Oh, is that what was it?
Semi-serious joke.
I think she was serious. I don't think it was a
Semi-serious.
joke. Oh gosh. All right, guys. Andy.
Yes, I don't want what Mariah just said to fall through the cracks. I mean, it made a lot of sense to me that it's hard for us to make any sensible decisions about getting out of leases until we sort of have a master plan. So what would be the timescale for the school committee to get its act together on that and, sort of know what we want?
I'd love to hear from Sam. I was going to say, now Sam raised his hand.
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Well, I commissioned a master plan in Dedham with SMMA, and there.
Can you say what SMMA is? I don't know what that is.
Maney, McKee, and Associates.
Okay.
The original look at the high school.
Okay, thanks.
Right.
And again, we did an RFP. They were the most advantageous bidder. The scope of work for us, and I think our master plan at the time was 5 or 6 years old. We looked at all of our, so it's a bottom line is, so timeline, assuming it cost $130,000. And we looked at, of our 7 schools, we looked at the three older elementaries, because early childhood center was just built, and a middle school was fairly new being 15 years old. And one of our elementary schools was within the past 10. And the high school was way down the road, given it didn't make sense to look at that. Timeline, assuming a district the size of Brookline, and what you're looking, let's say the number's twice, maybe it's 250,000 to do a master plan update. You get a committee together, you put an RFP on the street, you're looking, the turnaround to get a company in, is maybe from the time it hits the street, maybe a month. And then the study itself probably takes the better part of 6 months, but then that helps form, you need that anyway to put a statement of interest with the MSBA. That's a requirement, basically.
I would strongly encourage you to think about this in the context of the town of Brookline and try and coordinate your vision, master plan, facilities plan for the schools with the one that for the entire town. And for Bob and Mariah and David will recall a very long and somewhat contentious discussion in town meeting when we were talking about looking at things in Brookline comprehensively, as opposed to one-offs all the time or overlay districts, because when you look at things separately, all it does is it continues to pit school needs versus town needs. And I'd really like to see that end, and I know I'm not alone. So
Yeah, and it's just like what we were talking about with Erin earlier in terms of the Baker Playground. There's so much opportunity to economics and interests to just have it all be in sync. I couldn't agree more.
Just listening to the idea of air conditioning the schools, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could use those for cooling centers on
Exactly.
during heat waves to let people in? I mean, let's just think about buildings as belonging to the town as opposed to individual pieces of the town.
And Carl, I don't disagree. The only caveat I would give is certainly the use of school buildings are, at least during the school year, are somewhat unique versus town buildings.
Right.
Other than that, they're all the taxpayers of Brookline pay for all of them. That's not lost on me, not at all.
Is the town currently engaged in a process along these lines that we would coordinate with, or?
Well, unfortunately, that idea of sort of an overall let's stop and come up with a comprehensive plan that grows up from the bottom as opposed to that's imposed from the top, and sort of have it community driven. That idea was defeated by town meeting. So, and nothing has replaced it, unfortunately. But that's not to say that it still doesn't merit conversations among a lot of players. And I would think that, again, if the town school partnership wanted to promote that, I can't imagine anybody saying no. So it's certainly the BFAC report emphasized, the sharing of facilities and the sharing of staff. I mean, if we ever get, the staff people to do specialize in analytics, the idea would be that the schools as well as the town would use those talents. So, all the signs are pointing to doing it together. It's just,
I can say recently with the pandemic, we worked together quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example. So I just don't want to have another pandemic to have this happen again.
Well said.
And I can tell you from a school that's been moved around quite a bit in this district, I was thinking 10 years ago, maybe 15 years, the only place that my entire tenure here in Brookline that we've had B classrooms has been the Lynch Center. We have been moved from every building. So we would absolutely welcome a vision of where we would be. And spaces in the elementary schools for sure.
Right.
And alleviate some of the lease payments because they are quite large.
It just seems we have to move fairly quickly on the school side in order to make proper decisions about leases and also to hopefully have something we can present to the public when we ask them to vote on Pierce, right? So that it can be part of a coherent townwide plan. And so having to wait for a lot of town
I think actually the
coordination,
timeline might be okay because we're committed until September of 2023. So if we were to be able to do something in the next
Yeah, but
6 months.
Andy's saying the point is like about Pierce though, which is next fall, a year from this fall, 16 months from now.
Right.
So we have to be able to, I think he's right, that if we want people to buy into the Pierce building project, it's a more compelling case to show a vision for an integrated building need.
No, absolutely,
and plan, yeah.
absolutely. I mean, Pierce speaks for itself of why it needs to be done. It's almost irrelevant in terms of the totality, but yes.
I don't think
you're
so.
right.
I would disagree with that. I
guess
agree with you. It's very
Totally,
compelling. I don't
It's
think that it
totally
speaks for itself.
handicapped, inaccessible.
I guess the question, because this is partnered with the MSBA, Pierce is correct, Driscoll.
Correct.
So my question is, how did you get an SOI out without a master plan to show the need for maybe Matt can answer that. but-
Tongue in cheek, I wrote it. And I gave them the old master plan, and Pierce, the ADA was one thing. We were renting, 3 spaces at the time. We used to have 6 leases because we didn't all fit into Pierce, and it wasn't handicap accessible, and we were overcrowded. So of the 8 things, we were checking 4 of their boxes. So it was easy for them to say yes, even though the
And they
master
came and
plan might
saw
not
the
have been.
building. They came and saw the
Right.
building, and I
Got
think they were appalled.
And that was before we asked, actually, when they were doing their inventory.
Got it.
So-
it. 'Cause they did, that's right, the envelope study.
Right.
for envelope.
And it's still one of their pet peeves. The MSBA is in general never liked open floor classroom design. So they tend to favor, when folks request renovations for that, they tend to move them a little further ahead of the list of some other folks.
Yeah.
Can
guess
Oh, go
my
ahead.
overall takeaway with this is I agree, BEEP we need a vision, and we need to have it in a way that it's not going to be a cheap vision, and you want to be able to sell it and do it in a collaborative way. I just don't, and I guess I leave it to others. I can commission a study, or I can work with Matt. We can put something out on the street, work with the town. Again, if I did it tomorrow, you're looking at probably,
Springtime.
in the spring in spring of 2022 to have recommendations to then ask for something. Is that something that there's an interest in doing, or we don't know yet?
I would assume, Helen, that this needs to go to full school committee for a conversation, but I think that I will say myself, I am very interested in this, and I think it'll be critical. And to Carla's point about having it connect with the town, Parks does a good job, and I'll say Public Works in general, I think does a pretty good job, and they are at least when we're talking about facilities, it's not necessarily a comprehensive plan in the way that, it might not be as exhaustive as a comprehensive plan, but in terms of a facilities master plan,
Right.
They do have something that we can work with that's much more up to date and allows us to, as we think about sort of these key touchstones where schools touch other departments, that would be critical too. And they do have that. So we aren't in as terrible a situation in terms of being able to collaborate with the town side and having to work with their timeline.
And in Erin's defense from earlier, I thought she was going to say it, but they have more than just the school parks. They have other parks. That's why they're not all all the
But she
school
doesn't need
parks
to
on
be
the same page.
defended. She's amazing. She's got it. Like they're
Well, there
they're
was,
there.
I took it as a little bit like, how did we get here? Sometimes things back up a little bit for budgetary reasons, but they're
Oh, right.
not that far off. It's not just as 8 schools, so one should be done every 3 years. They have other parks and playgrounds in town.
So Sasaki Associates did a strategic assets management plan and
No management, just strategic asset plan.
strategic assets plan and a major parcel study. And the two were supposed to work together. If the X department needs Y, then you look at the major parcel study to identify where that use could possibly fit.
Sasaki did that for whom?
Did that for
Planning.
the town?
For the town?
It was finished right before the pandemic, is my recollection. So
Well, we're working with Millie Dyer Spears Sasaki Partnership on the Pierce program, and
quite a bit before the.
I think it was like 4 months beforehand, wasn't it? It took a while for the final. I thought it was in winter
fresh.
2019.
That's
Yeah, it is.
new.
No, I'm saying
Yeah.
it was pre-pandemic, but not like significantly. Anyway, in that ballpark.
And the other thing is that Charlie Simmons has a multi-volume condition study of all town buildings.
Right.
That he updates as time moves on, but he also has been talking about undertaking a new study or a major updating of that study, but the price tag he's been coming up with were just very, very big.
So what did Sasaki actually do for the town? Just so that I'm aware.
Sasaki interviewed all the different department heads and asked them what their current needs were. And just about all of them said they needed more storage space. And then they talked about what their programmatic needs were. And all of that information was compiled into a study, and I might be able to find it over here.
I have the link, but I can't. But if you just Google Brookline Strategic Asset Plan, the webpage comes up with, because we don't have chat, so I can't share the link.
It was done in
fine.
March 2018.
Oh, so it's even a more beyond what like you said. I was way off. In my mind, it was fresh.
And then the major parcel study.
You know what? I may have seen this now that I'm thinking about it.
They're very well done. They're very well done in terms of sort of surveying the community and the departments and identifying potential uses and so forth. So
okay.
How can we bring this forward to the school committee so that potentially, Sam and Matt can get the process going in good time?
Is that something, Helen, you can ask to be placed on the full agenda?
Yeah, but I don't know when we're meeting again is number one. What I'm thinking is, let's get a meeting going in August, the beginning of August. Matt and Sam and I will talk about putting together what it is we're looking for, what we have and what we're looking for, and then get it out to everybody here so you can comment on it. So we can start the process. I don't think the school committee will be against it, considering there are 4 of us here right now who are sort of in favor. And I think the question will be the cost and the scope. What do we need and what do we want? And what do we already have that just needs to be put into this document? You know what I mean?
Right. Like we've been moving in a direction. I just wanted to put it down into words and try to get everybody onto the same page with just the leases without trying to do the whole capital, master plan all at once. So that's why I shared that with you. We were going to have to answer these questions anyway, so just to have a little more time to think about them seemed to be the best way to start it.
Okay, so it's 6:05. There's a building commission meeting that I need to go to that I'm not excited about going to, but I need to go to. And are people available the second Tuesday in August, possibly, which would be August 10th?
Answer for me is yes.
Yes, as well.
Aren't we already meeting on August 3rd as a subcommittee?
Did I have that down?
I've got that in my calendar as a capital meeting to discuss the CIP.
I
on
can
the
do
3rd.
either. Oh, wait, yes, because somebody wasn't gonna be here. Okay, well, let me just
Can we do
understand.
that offline? Can we figure out the schedule offline?
The day is
Absolutely.
fine.
Okay.
Okay, I'll have Robin next week put out a doodle poll. We'll see if we can get when Charlie's available, and then we'll go from there.
I'm so excited we're talking about this because I feel like it's just so important. And but did we ever vote on the dishwasher grant?
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank
This
you
is
for
great. I'm
keeping
really
us honest. I move that we accept the dishwasher grant and we recommend to the school committee to accept it.
I'm a little bit, I didn't get all the materials about it. Did it go to BEF and is BEF agreed to fund it? Bye, Carla. Thank you. What we got from Sasha wasn't, it was an email and it said, Joya, I'm sending this to you. And I didn't know who
No, it
Joya
was
was.
together. If you scroll down, there were two, Robin attached two pieces, one with the exact details of which schools were getting dishwashers, trays, knives, forks, everything. It was all in there.
But who is the grant from?
Good question. Oh, it's a private donor.
Wishes to remain anonymous, according to the
Private
lawyer.
donor, and it's a donor directed fund. We put in a grant to this fund and they agreed to fund it at 162,000.
Okay, got it.
Which was pretty much everything that Sasha asked for.
Yeah.
Okay, and so this means all of our schools that serve food will, I'm assuming Beep doesn't serve food?
That have kitchens. So
Okay.
you know, Beep doesn't have kitchens per se.
Okay, so all of our schools that have kitchens will now have full ability to go off of disposables onto regular reusable materials. Is that the idea?
That's the way I understand it.
Yep.
I also noticed that the grant includes $13,500 for a part-time position for the coming year to, like, as a steward to sort of help operate these things. But that eventually would become a permanent position that would have to be funded from our operating budget.
Or would it need to be permanent?
Yeah, maybe it's only to get it
Once
set
you
up
learn
and
the
train
system,
people.
it's not that hard to use a dishwasher once you learn it, I would imagine.
So the expenses in the schools and the items are listed on page 5 of the 13 page. It's just a numbered PDF that got scanned. So Baker School, Lincoln School, Lawrence School, Pierce School, and Old Lincoln would be the places that would get dishwashers. I guess the other places already have them. They just haven't really been in use.
Matt, who put together this budget? Did you? Or did Sasha?
No, this was all Sasha. I gave a 5-second blessing when she said, you know,
Is the electrical
do this?
in the ballpark, or where did the electrical amount come from?
I'm guessing that she talked to the vendor for installation and what it would cost to rewire if there wasn't an outlet to the right amount right there.
And are these
that amount seems relatively reasonable. I'm not sure if she had somebody come out and look at each particular space or if that's kind of a standard add-on price.
And do you know how much do we spend on dispose? Like basically is the cost, there's no additional annual cost in terms of like whatever we lose in terms of breakage or whatever, is it offset by?
I think these are plastic dishes, no?
So yeah, we have disposable ware and compostable ware that we pay a decent amount for. The only they don't really break. These things are pretty durable. You lose them when kids throw them throw them away in the trash by mistake. That's where the loss comes from. They can get dropped and thrown, for lack of a better way to say it, and they're going to survive. They're made to last through the next ice age with all the washing and everything they go through. But when they accidentally go in the trash barrel, if it's not recovered, that's what you have to replace.
So what are they?
What are what?
The trays?
What is it all made out of? This indestructible material, is it plastic?
Yeah, it's probably recycled plastic.
Okay, and it's like, but it's like BPA free and et cetera.
I haven't investigated that. I'm leaning on Sasha a little bit, but you know, she asked me about it and whether or not she should apply for the grant. And I said, eventually we would like to get out of the disposable trays and putting less trash into the environment. So
We did this, I'm sorry, in our last, in Dedham, we did this, the only recommend, and it's great, but you do get a lot of, my strong recommendation is get magnetized around the top of where the trash bins are so they can catch these knives and forks and spoons that get inadvertently tossed so we can recover them more easily.
So I guess my question is like, did the donor have a cap? Can we add in, like this project is to the dollar. Is there like if we've missed something?
I don't know. I'd have to ask Sasha. I'm getting
But-
texts about the building commission meeting and they're talking about
Okay,
Pierce. So Mariah, I'm happy to take this one, you know.
I guess does capital need
directly.
to vote? I'm voting to support it to go forwards, but hopefully asking that you could kick the tires a little bit more to be sure that it's including all these things that we should be thinking about. Is that a motion that someone else is willing to second? It's a little sloppy, but yes.
I'll second it, because just to move things along here. That because we're not going to have a school committee meeting, I don't think, before these things get installed. I assume the idea is to do it this summer, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
Unless, you know, I mean, as long as we're in agreement, I think we should move forward. The school committee has said we want this, so it's not something that's, I think I remember talking about having reusable plates and, you know, trays and going back to the future, so to speak.
So do we want to vote since we have a
Yeah,
motion in a second?
I think we should, with the caveat that you put forward to check to see if there's if we overexpend, is there a possibility of the donor increasing the amount?
Well, or that before we officially submit it, or if we need to adjust it or whatever.
For the grant, they already
Right.
did.
Oh, it's
The
already
grant
gone
was
through the whole.
approved.
Oh, it's
You
already
need
been
the-
approved.
the
No,
grant
I
was
didn't.
We were awarded the grant.
I see.
In the
Got
amount
it.
that we asked for.
I see. Yeah, I was just confused by the paperwork. Okay, I vote yes.
Thanks.
Okay, Andy?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. So I think we'll go forward with it. If there's a couple $1,000s more that we need to add into it,
We'll
it's
take
still
it out
worth
of the revolver and food service. We're not gonna.
Exactly.
Okay, sounds
Exactly.
good. Thank
Okay,
you.
guys.
That's exciting.
I will get back to you with our meeting in August, but I do think we need to meet in order to go over the CIP, okay?
Thanks.
Thank you. And
Bye.
go over the master plan proposal. Thanks, bye.